Come on, any 71-year-old man who looks like George has to feel his mortality. Have a little bit more respect.
Jesus.
What?
Just feel like I'm talking to the Grim Reaper over here.
I'm not the Grim Reaper, but come on. If your grandfather looked like that, you'd have a talk with him.
Welcome back to Shat on TV, Game of Thrones edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the juggernaut HBO series, Game of Thrones. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And this is our fan mail edition where we look back on this week's episode of Game of Thrones and provide our feedback on the top listener emails and voicemails for the week. This week's episode was titled, The Iron Throne. You spent more than an hour listening to our ideas on Tuesday's Deep Dive. Now it's our turn to hear from you. And this week, Big D, we had another strong showing of emails from the listeners. Dozens and dozens came pouring in even after the last episode of Game of Thrones, showing that people still have a lot to say about this series.
I was shocked because we can't always see them in one shot. We have them organized in Trello on cards as we vote. We move them around. So I was like, you know what? Let me see how many we had to. This was our number one episode for getting email responses. I thought it was going to be a fairly light week, but even though the show's over, people still had a lot to say.
And a lot of the emails were rewrites, which we asked for, basically the way you would have done the show, and some fantastic creativity there. So we'll be doing a rewrites episode later in the podcast season. And even this edition of the Small Council will be a little bit shorter than last week's. Last week's we went over 2 hours. So this week we're going to split it up. We'll have this one for you today. And then the next one will come out on Tuesday. We'll have a bonus episode of the Small Council. And so I think the release schedule, if it works for you, Big D, is I'd like to do the Small Council 2, let's call it, on May 28th. The following Tuesday, we could do the Thronies, which will be our Game of Thrones awards and a season recap. So that'll be kind of the next sort of deep dive. And we'll be releasing the Thronies on our website, shatontv.com, along with on Twitter. And we'll announce how you can find the Thronies on the next Small Council episode. Please go check out the Thronies, vote for your favorites, do your write-ins. We had a lot of fun doing them last season, and we're really excited to do those again. And then finally, on June 11th, we'll be doing the rewrites edition. So that'll be everybody's ideas that you've written in so far. And if you still have ideas for rewrites, please write them in, host at shatontv.com. And we'll get to those on Tuesday, June 11th with the rewrite edition.
Yeah, and also, this week's been kind of sad. Not only the show's over, but I feel like we've had a breakup. Like, I've gotten all kinds of social media contacts and emails where people are like, well, I guess I'll see you at the Watchmen. Okay. It's been great seeing you guys. I'm going to miss you. Okay. We're not dying. You could stop by still and see the movies.
Yeah, we literally release a podcast every week all year long. We're not going anywhere. And Game of Thrones has been a great way to all come together. But we have listeners who have joined us from Westworld, from Taboo, from American Gods, from True Detective. And we like to keep it going. Again, it's about hanging out with each other, exchanging ideas. We have some longtime listeners that we've developed some real friendships with, but we're not going anywhere. You don't have to have Game of Thrones to interact with us.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're that group of friends. We're kind of the weird ones, and they can only hang out with us, if something else is going on, like at the football game. Well, I can't see you guys during the week, but on the weekends, maybe I'll see you. But what is kind of nice, though, is, Gene, I'm actually going on vacation this weekend. I'm going to Boston to see my family.
Nice.
Yeah, this is something I couldn't have done any other week because my wife's like, hey, let's go see our family. I was like, I can't. I have to record on Sunday. Then I got to bring the equipment. I can't talk loud in the house when the kids are sleeping. So even though the show's over and I'm sad, it is nice to actually get some time to spend with the family.
One of my favorite types of email we've been getting this week is people saying like, hey, why don't you start back on the books and do a podcast about the book starting from book one? Or why don't we do a rewatch of the entire series? And when are movies starting up again? And I think we need at least a week to catch our breath, even though we are releasing all these episodes in addition. It's going to be nice to watch a TV show and not think while I'm watching it, what am I going to say about this? I can actually just watch TV. I've been watching Barry. I watched season 1 of Barry finally. And I'm like, this is really relaxing. Is this what watching TV is like?
Yeah, but I remember when we last time had Game of Thrones and then we switched back to movies, you can't flip that switch. I think it was like Home Alone or something we did. And we were trying to break down like what was the hidden message behind Kevin McAllister's design of the obstacles. We overanalyzed it, but it was a lot of fun. But we thank everybody who's been with us on the journey, everybody who's donated. We're a small independent podcast. And what keeps us going is the relationships we build. So, don't break up with us. Come check in every now and then.
All right. As Big D and I clink a pair of Coronas and walk with our flip-flops toward the beach for our much-needed vacation, one more small council. Big D, take us to the small council.
Shame. Shame. Shame.
Earlier in this season, I said, let's all wait until episode 6 is over so we can assign blame or assign praise. That time has come. We've seen all there is to see of Game of Thrones, and people wrote in with their ideas on who to praise, who to blame. And our first email comes from Brandon Kester, who writes in, "Hey guys, I need to clarify that I did not love the final season. I have a lot of issues, including how fast everything moved. Bran's story is wrapped up with a, why do you think I'm here? And Jon's parentage being used for pushing Dany over the edge and literally nothing else. But I'll let others dive into the complaints, which again are earned. But for all the people calling this the worst finale ever, signing a petition to reshoot season 8, or calling D&D trash, you need to calm the hell down. First of all, worst finale ever? I was a fan of Lost. This finale isn't even close to the bottom. They didn't leave much speculation on where the characters were, and whether we like it or not, I can appreciate not ending on a cliffhanger. Second, signing a petition to reshoot season 8? Really? Hey, losers, you aren't owed anything because Game of Thrones was the greatest show on television for 5 or 6 seasons instead of 8. Lastly, those who say they could have done a better job than D&D, no, you couldn't. If someone handed you George's books and told you to finish it without knowing what D&D did the final 3 seasons, it would be a shit show. Finishing perhaps the most intricate fantasy saga ever without the original writer's work is an insane task. This was, for many seasons, the best adapted screenplay I've ever seen. I think forgetting that would be a real shame. Anyway, here's to George going bankrupt on hookers and blow, so he's forced to finish the books. Be in Oregon.
You got to be careful when you talk about the Lost finale. Our listeners are just going to come out of the woodwork and just attack you. John H., okay, one of our listeners, he wrote in after he heard me mention Lost being bad, and he said, "Big D, I'm sorry, but you're a smart guy, but that Lost finale just went totally over your head." So I wrote him back and I said, hey, no. I said, listen, here's my problem. Lindelof claimed that he was going to give us real world answers. He didn't. And it just meandered. They wrote the show as they went along. He wrote back and said, hey, was that your canned answer, your auto reply for all of your Lost haters? So we went back and forth and we came to an understanding. It is much easier to write a show than it is to close a show. So everybody's saying, well, I could do it. And that's why we encourage you to do your rewrites. But the Double Ds, they're talented guys. I think they were just worn down. They probably could have done better, but it could have been a lot worse.
Thanks, B, for your email. Next up, we have another one in defense of George R.R. Martin coming from Anna Lemonade, who writes, George might not have been able to finish the books, which led Dave and Dan into the uncharted territory of creating television preceding its source material. But the creators went out of their way to further sabotage the ending season's slim chances of being well-written by insisting on their obsession of a 73-hour movie that they envisioned in 2009 or so because of reasons. HBO offered more time, money, and episodes for them multiple times, one executive even calling their decision horrifying. George himself stated that instead of the 10-episode seasons, there should be 13, and that they easily could have gone up to 13 seasons even with the sheer amount of material. Many people, including myself, do not criticize the turn of events in and of themselves, but the poor and sometimes non-existent exploration of the journeys, decisions, themes. The major plot points are probably going to be the same in Song of Ice and Fire eventually, but without the now Game of Thrones trademark jetpacking, Valley Girl dialogues, and seemingly nonsensical decisions made by characters. Every time I see D&D talking about the episodes, dropping gems like, Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet, I just want to punch their faces. And also thank them for creating this insanely good show. With George, my feelings aren't ambivalent. Do not blame the mastermind behind this world that we spend so much time in for the sass of two otherwise competent dudes. And that comes from Anna Lemonade.
See, but I think this is the chicken and the egg dilemma. Were the Double Ds forced into this writing situation because George took his time? The last book was released within a week or two of the series premiere. They haven't gotten anything. So yes, maybe George had a little writer's block. He started feeling the pressure and sat back. That put the Double Ds in the situation, who then said, hey, George, what are you doing? Screw you. I'm done with this. They want to move on. I think there's enough blame to pass around between the three of them, but that's where it ends. The rest of the cast, crew, production, it stays focused on these three individuals.
Yeah, and it's important to note, Anna, what you just said in your email. They made this decision back in 2009. I don't think they had the foresight to understand the way things were going to spin out. And another listener, Ken L., wrote in, also pointing the finger at D&D. He said, the showrunners are 100% to blame for the corner cutting and breakneck pace. They caused it. A recurring theme of the podcast is a well-intentioned defense of the showrunners, along the lines of following, sure, some corners are being cut and some plots are being rushed, but D&D are doing the best they can to cram so much content into 2 condensed seasons. Stop being so nitpicky and enjoy because we only have a few weeks left. I think he's talking about you, Big D. This is a fairly reasonable line of argument until you consider the following. Against HBO's wishes, and presumably against most fans' wishes, D&D decided to make the final 2 seasons shorter. The rush plots, the jetpacking, the emailing, the cut corners, and every single instance where you might be tempted to say, oh, I can forgive this mistake because they can only fit so much into a few episodes, are entirely D&D's fault because they were the ones who truncated the amount of time they had to tell the story. Praising D&D for doing their best under the circumstances is like praising an arsonist for trying to contain the damage of a fire he started. D&D decided that 73 hours was enough, and they were wrong. We all give George R.R. Martin shit for taking his damn time to write the books, but I think maybe we all could learn a little from George. Rushing a decade of storytelling in the final chapters doesn't give us a satisfying goodbye to a beloved series. It gives us sloppy writing and Starbucks cups. I'm sorry, but fuck you, D.B. Weiss. Fuck you, David Benioff. You done fucked up. Peace, love, fire, and blood. Ken L.
You see, but Ken, here's the problem. I think the Double D started to feel like they were put out in front of the line to take shots. So George hit a roadblock and he said, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to do. Let's let these 2 guys do part of the work. They'll be like a test run. George now, it has been 8+ years since he released A Dance with Dragons. Keep that in mind. He'll be 71 years old this year. At his current pace, do you think, honestly, I'm not wishing the man ill will, if let's just say within the next year that we get the Winds of Winter, right? He's 72. On his current pace, he'll be 80 years old. George doesn't look like the healthiest guy, okay? He doesn't look like he's going to be speeding up anytime soon. On Twitter, we did a poll. Do you think that George will finish both Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring? 85% of our listeners said George will finish only one of the books or none of the books. So there was only 15% of the audience that believes he's going to finish both books. So if you're a fan of the books and a fan of George, you better light a fire under him. Otherwise, you're not going to get it in the end.
Last year, I was out on a run with one of my friends who's a massive Game of Thrones fan. And he's like, dude, did you get the new book? And I was like, there's a new book out? It's like, yeah, they released a new book. I was like, oh, is it like some other writers, like a spinoff thing? They're like, no, it's George R.R. Martin. He released a new book. I got really excited until I got online and looked it up. And I was like, oh, he released a prequel or a history, a companion piece. Yeah. And that to me is all I need to know about the fact that if you're busy writing the companion piece, when I'm trying to figure out how the hell the story ends, it's telling me that you're having a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, and it's I think it's also that you don't respect the audience. You know they're sitting there waiting, and you know there's a chance. Come on, any 71-year-old man who looks like George has to feel his mortality. Have a little bit more respect.
Jesus.
What?
Just feel like I'm talking to the Grim Reaper over here.
I'm not the Grim Reaper, but come on. If your grandfather looked like that, you'd have a talk with him.
I'm just waiting to see you at the Goth Club, Big D. Mm-hmm. Coming to the dark side. Come on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ken, for your email. Next up, we've got one from Gary. Gary writes in movies, I have a law that states As budget goes to infinity, the script goes to zero. I call it Gilbody's Law. Ha ha. It's Gary Gilbody. Get it? The last 2 seasons have been big budget pyrotechnics, but the characters have become cardboard-like in nature. The Double Ds have oscillated between indulgent nostalgia, which is nice but does not drive character development, or sudden changes in behavior, like Jaime going back to King's Landing, Dany going Dresden. I would have rather had 20 meaningful episodes than the Transformer-esque ones. And that comes from Gary Gilbody of Gilbody's Law. So, Gary, I think Gilbody's Law is a thing, and it's the reason why we're really surprised when series like, say, The Avengers come out, right? The Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think, has done a great job of showing us what happens when you can take a massive budget and couple it with writing that sort of makes sense. It's not the Transformers. It's not like just mindless explosions. There's actually things happening. But in that series, I would say that, say, Avengers Endgame is one of the weaker films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Why? Because they had to bring it all back together. You had to do all the callbacks. You have to satisfy so many things that the audience wants. And that's why I say Endgame isn't as good as like Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok had very little to answer to. They just got to have fun. Guardians of the Galaxy is another example. You take a franchise that people don't know a lot about. They don't have expectations of the characters. So you can have tons of freedom. The more we become acquainted with characters and their storylines, the more we have expectations. And it's very hard to separate what you expect from what makes sense, because you've decided it makes sense because it's what you expect. So there is a strange dichotomy there. But I do agree that Gilbody's Law does seem to apply. Generally speaking, bigger the budget, the worse the script.
See, but I think you can have them both. If you think back to season 2, episode 9, probably one of the top 5 episodes on most fans' list is Blackwater, and we got the Battle of Blackwater Bay. Even though there was this giant sprawling, battle at sea, and then also on the beachhead and at the gates, you also had great character development and weaving in multiple storylines. So it can be done, but it's very, very, very difficult.
That's true, Big D, but it's important to remember that Blackwater only cost about $8 million to make, which was considered over budget for that season if you break it down by a per episode budget. Whereas The Long Night, episode 3 of season 8, cost $15 million to make, and that was considered normal for the budget for this season. So I can see where the temptation lies. And if you watch the behind the scenes footage for Game of Thrones, you can see where they're like, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do this? Wouldn't it be cool to do that? And when you do get wrapped up in that production, I can see where wanting to do monumental things on screen could sacrifice maybe not necessarily the quality of the script, but definitely the density of it.
Just for fun. Do you know who wrote that episode, Blackwater?
Is that George R.R. Martin?
Oh, yes, it was. Maybe George should have popped his head around the set a little bit more. The ones he wrote seemed to be pretty good. I mean, the last one was The Lion and the Rose when Joffrey gets it, and that was 5 years ago. So he not only hasn't been putting out books, he's actively avoided the writer's room with them to help them guide the ship. You could have helped, George.
Verily, we all abide by Gilbody's Law. Next up, we have a little bit of blame for me, and it comes from Matt from Bama. And he's quoting something I said when talking about episode 6 of season 8. He says, "Accept that Daenerys has turned. Don't carry the baggage into this. Put yourself into the mindset that they did a convincing job of making Daenerys turn into a villain. If you accepted that, then this is an exquisite episode." And Matt's response is, unlike some, I do not expect you to burn down King's Landing, even if you did not enjoy this last season as much as you would have liked. But I do not like at all to be advised how I should view this thing so I can paint it rosier than it is. They did not do a convincing job of fleshing out Dany's fall or much of anything else. And because they didn't, I do not accept it, and so I do not think it was an exquisite episode or season. With that said, I didn't hate it, but I didn't enjoy it either. It's not the point. Up until this season, I have considered Game of Thrones to be near flawless television, but this final season was just not good, and that's all okay. I'm a University of Alabama grad. This past football season was epic, but they screwed the pooch in the national championship against Clemson. It doesn't mean they didn't have an epic season, but it does mean it ended in disappointment, and no mindset adjustment will change that. And that comes from Matt from Bama. Well, Matt, you're absolutely right in the sense that for a series perspective, You shouldn't overlook things from previous episodes. But on an episode by episode breakdown, I liken it to movies that have sequels. Some sequels are good, some sequels are bad. And I can't fault the makers of episode 6 for the shortcomings of episode 5 or any previous stuff. And so from what I'm saying is the perspective of we are to understand as an audience that Daenerys has turned. That's been established inside and outside of the show, through podcasts, through interviews, behind the scenes footage, and the script itself. And again, I don't mean to tell you how to watch TV. So it's more of an if-then statement. If you accept that Daenerys has turned, then this is a good episode. If you don't accept it, which you clearly don't, then maybe you won't enjoy the episode as much as you would like. Thanks, Matt, for your email. Aside from assigning blame, a lot of people wanted to talk about Bran, whether the decision to crown him was the right one. And Big D, you focused on that a lot in the deep dive. So some listeners wrote in, and first we have Josh from New York City who says, let's have a thought experiment. Let's say Jon never finds out about his lineage. They unite to defeat the Night King, and then they go and defeat Cersei. Maybe Daenerys doesn't destroy the entire city, but just the Red Keep, killing thousands instead of hundreds of thousands. Do we really think she's going to stop at that? No. She's going to demand fealty from everyone, including Sansa, and force that through fire and blood. With her power now supreme, do we think Daenerys is going to stop? No. She's going to try to conquer the world. She is a threat to the world almost as big as the Night King and must be defeated. So Bran plants the seed of division, which ultimately leads to Jon killing Daenerys. Yes, it also means he becomes king, but I think that Bran is only interested in the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. He can manifest that principle because he sees all futures. Hence, he is the perfect agent for change and to start to set the world on a path to peace. Sincerely, Josh from New York City.
Okay, so Josh, I'm going to try to dissect this, what you talked about. Today on Twitter, someone asked and said, had Bran figured it out at this point? Because wasn't he saying he hadn't gotten more than just the fragments? In season 7, I think it's episode 3, when Bran returns to Winterfell and he sees Sansa again, he says something to the effect of, I'm only getting bits and pieces. It's fragments now. I need to get the whole picture together before the long night comes. So we can assume between that point in season 7 to the long night, he's gotten it together because he's been sitting in the courtyard. He's been thinking, he's been warging, he's been practicing, he's been using the green sight. So he has the complete picture by the time the long night comes. When Jon, Sansa, and Arya meet at the Weirwood, Bran doesn't guide him. Bran doesn't say, this will lead to the best result. If you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. He doesn't say, well, Jon, let's keep this a secret for a little bit longer because it might push Daenerys over the edge and she might roast King's Landing. He gives Jon a false sense of free will because he knows that Jon's just going to go with the flow and do what he would normally do and have his sense of honor that he has to tell Daenerys and he has to tell his sisters. So Bran didn't help. At no point did he help someone make a wise decision. He just let them make the worst. And that's just as bad.
And related to that, Big D, Rachel from South Lyon, Michigan wrote in about Bran's lack of lines or the fact that he's a fairly quiet guy. She says, I have one varying different opinion that I haven't heard from a lot of people regarding Bran. I know a lot of people have expressed that he has known what is going to happen for a long time now, and that may be true. I do wish he would have been given better lines. I cannot speak to the books, but everyone who expresses that Bran is really the bad guy doesn't make a lot of sense to me because that has never been hinted at, ever. Even Dany's downward spiral was foreshadowed. Is he creepy at times? For sure. But as far as warning everybody about what's to come, it makes me wonder if he's not supposed to mess with future events. When he warged into Hodor, that was in the past, I believe, and we all know that had negative ramifications. Maybe there is some three-eyed raven understanding that if you attempt to change the future as you see it, worse consequences would occur. Even if he did tell someone about the events to come, would it have changed Daenerys' actions? Would they have tried to stop her more? Would Jon have continued to claim, but she is my queen? I'm not a huge Bran fan by any means at all. I feel he was way underused, but I think people may need to consider the possibility that even if he shared what he saw in visions of the future, either people would have still behaved the same way or they would have made different decisions that could have led to worse events. I know he did share that the Night King was specifically targeting him, but the Night King was coming for him and everyone anyway. He would have killed Bran and everyone else. I hope that makes a little bit of sense what I'm saying. Basically, I'm thinking if we mess with the future or the past, we could end up with worse results. And people will always find a way to make their own choices to become who they are. Sure, I would have loved to see this come out in the story if this is the actual case, but that's just my thinking on it. And that comes from Rachel from South Lyon, Michigan.
Okay, so Rachel, here's a question for you. Bran uses his knowledge of what's going to happen, that the Night King is coming for him, to structure a defense, that he's going to be outside and act as bait. He's willing to risk the future events by telling them that. Why wouldn't he tell them other things? He doesn't give them one piece of information that is beneficial to them. Not one. Maybe drop a, hey, Daenerys, don't fly to Dragonstone. Or, hey, keep an eye out in the horizon. He doesn't even do that. He'll risk the future and changing it when it benefits him. Oh, I'm going to sit out in the weirwood. I need some protection. Yep. We're going to make him come for me. You knew he was going to come for you. You knew he was going to shoot down, that Euron's going to shoot down a dragon. Hook a brother up.
And I was thinking about the way Bran sees things. One of the nice things about the TV show is it's shown us the green site through Bran's eyes. We get to see what it looks like. And yeah, it's bits and pieces, but he seems to experience everything in real time, right? So it's not like Back to the Future where he goes to the past for a year and then comes back and he's just only 5 seconds have passed. It's not Avengers Endgame. So you can assume that he's got limited time to go check things out. But still, you would think that he'd check out key things like maybe, hey, everybody's going south to Dragonstone. Maybe I should check that out at least. It does seem like it would be in his best interest. But we have to remember two things. One is the three-eyed raven we saw before was like 1,000 years old. So dude's got it pretty perfected. Bran's still a kid. Like he hasn't had this power forever. He's not a master at this point. He's still a young guy figuring out this power.
Hey, yeah, he seems pretty confident. The small council? Maybe I'll go find Drogon. Okay, you're going to go find the needle in the haystack? He seems pretty confident in his ability now.
Well, you don't know how long it's going to take him. He might be like, I'm going to take the next year to go find Drogon.
No, did that little smirk make you think he thought it was going to take a year?
That's just his face. Anyway, thanks, Rachel, for your email. A lot of people also wrote in about the process by which Bran was chosen, or the Kingsmoot. And we'll start with the man with no name who writes, hey guys, Game of Thrones will go down as one of the greatest series in TV history. And any debate or disappointment on the last season or ending is, as you have said, a built-up expectation of one's own ideas of where the show should go or how we want the characters to act. But we are the viewers, not the writers, and we must let go and let the writers take us on their ride. That said, in this last episode, the Great Council scene to me was just a mess. It starts even before the Great Council. Although we didn't see Jon get taken after killing Dany, why should we believe Grey Worm and the Dothraki would remain civil and not immediately kill him? Why wouldn't they then kill Tyrion and most likely just run wild around King's Landing with no decorum? Who had the calm and resolve to then send ravens to all the lords and call them to King's Landing? In episode 1, season 1, where Robert, Cersei, and all arrived at Winterfell and Robert wanted to immediately go to the crypt, Cersei says something like, we've been on the road for a month, the dead can wait. How then in a week's time did all the lords make it to King's Landing? If you want to believe Grey Worm has the honor to take orders from a king or queen and took it upon himself to keep Jon prisoner until it was decided by something greater than himself, his actions contradict this. Because why did he only bring Tyrion out when the lords asked to see both Tyrion and Jon? Grey Worm never makes mention and starts acting tough that he and the Dothraki are now in charge at King's Landing. Then Grey Worm flips back to letting the lords speak and rule, and even gives Tyrion, who is a prisoner, the final vote to choose who should rule. Why would all the lords listen to Tyrion? I can come to peace with the fate of each character devised by the writers, but this scene seemed all over the place and a little cheesy with all the lords sitting there. It just seemed like the writers wanted us, the viewers, to see them one last time and say goodbye. Felt like a bad ending to a sitcom. If we can rework that scene and make a different transition to Bran becoming king, everything else would have worked better for me. I guess we can't have everything. Signed, a man with no name.
So in the deep dive, we discussed the fact that we wanted to see Jon's reaction. We wanted to see the confrontation, that we felt that piece was missing. I know why they didn't put it in, because you can't make the transition from that logical scene. If Grey Worm comes in, the Dothraki come in, there's no way Jon survives. They rage. Imagine Daenerys is killed. They kill Jon, then they go slaughter the Northmen that are there. They go on a rampage through Westeros. You then can't transition to Dothraki PD that we see in this episode, where it's like dun 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 dun, and they're patrolling the streets of King's Landing. They're keeping stuff safe. It's like one mistake led to the next, which led to the next, which led to the next. And it's steamrolled from the premise that somehow we got to figure out a way to get Bran on the throne.
And listener Steve had a really interesting observation about the whole thing. He said at least half the lords present at the Kingsmoot had no idea what Tyrion was talking about when he's referring to Bran's gifts. Not one of them seemed to need any clarification as to what the hell he was saying. I would have liked at least the Dornish prince to speak up and say, is the guy in the wheelchair Bran? Can someone please fill me in on what that guy in handcuffs is talking about? And don't get me started on Sam just popping up in a full maester's garb, even though he only spent a couple weeks at the Citadel, mostly cleaning bedpans. Ugh. And that comes from Steve. Steve, you got a great point. I didn't even think about this till you wrote it in. I'm like, wait, yeah, everyone just happens to know what the hell is going on. Like, they're like, oh, yeah, so this guy can see the future. That's cool. He should probably be king. That makes sense. And this is really one of the objections I had to this whole episode was the entire 7 kingdoms or 6 kingdoms are on the line, and the most fight people are going to have is just nodding their heads and going, yeah, all right.
I found myself thinking, what would Littlefinger think about this? Littlefinger must be rolling over his grave like, damn it, the game is so easy now. Nobody's playing it. What the hell? All I got to do is say, hey, let's make him king and people will do it? Come on, that's not realistic. All of a sudden, the game stopped. Remember, half the people here haven't even been touched by the war. They haven't seen the dead. They don't know what Bran's special abilities are. It just doesn't seem plausible. And also, you have 3 Starks in there voting. That's a little unfair.
Well, technically, I don't think Arya or Bran gets a vote. I think
so then why the fuck did they?
The vote.
Then why did they?
Because just like Steve said, they want to have everybody here so you can say goodbye to them. That's
right,
it.
But you're swaying public opinion. Don't raise your hand then. Just sit silently in the corner. It's like bring your kid to work day. Just sit there.
That's the objection you have, not the fact that of all the ways they could decide who gets to be king, they had everybody go to the dragon pit. They had Tyrion, who was a prisoner, give a speech. People said, yeah, that makes sense to us. And the Unsullied are like, see you later. We're going to Naath.
Yeah. It's better than playing rock, paper, scissors.
All right. The one character we haven't really talked about yet is Jon Snow. And we had several emails come in about him, starting off with Kim K, who says, the truly brilliant thing about Jon's journey as a character is that he never got his black and white, right and wrong moral ending that we all expected for him as the heir apparent to Ned Stark's values. Even though he was not Ned Stark's son by blood, throughout the show, it was proven that he was the most like him and that he was bound by honor, duty, and doing what he thought was right. I personally expected Jon to end up dying by the end of the series because he did something noble. But now that I've seen what D&D had in store for him, I think it is poetic that, unlike Ned Stark, Jon didn't get to have an ending where he did what he clearly thought was right. In performing his last major action in the show, stabbing Dany in the heart for doing what she thought was right, as happened to him, he was caught in between right and wrong, black and white. And for anyone saying, yes, of course it was the right thing to stab Daenerys, I turn to Big D's point that we will never know if Dany would have been a benevolent ruler because we didn't get to see her rule. Jon had to make the toughest call of the entire show, and I have no doubt that he will spend the rest of his days wondering if he did the right thing. And that comes from Kim K.
Kim, I love what you're saying here. And Jon has one of the worst characteristics in a leader. He's indecisive. There's never been a point where Jon is like, yes, this is the way to go. I'm confident in it. It's always like, I don't know. Should we do this? I don't know. Should we? Okay, no, we'll do that. And what do you think? And then he has conversations. Indecision in many military situations gets people killed. Jon, right or wrong, pick a lane, go with it. And the fact that he could be so easily swayed we're just probably lucky that he didn't end up sitting on the throne, because I don't think that would have ended well. Whoever was sitting on his right side, whoever was whispering in his ear, they would have been the true power behind the throne.
Also, brilliant catch pointing out that Jon was stabbed by people he thought were his brothers, just as Daenerys was stabbed by Jon, who she assumed was her love. There is a beautiful parallelism there that contrasts with the difference between Jon and Ned. So, Kim, that's a wonderful analysis. Next up, we have Sean Stewart, who says, the conversation between Jon and Daenerys is absurd. Daenerys argues exactly that which Aegon would have argued, that any monarch would argue, the actual purpose of a monarchy. Before Aegon and Balerion reigned fear over Westeros, they fought relentlessly. He brought peace to the realm. Jon falls back on the old adage, but who chooses? It's an infantile argument to make any claims that all should choose. It had only proven to create chaos. This is not a time of democracy, as is shown when they all laugh at the idea of each person having a voice. And the level of absurdity is highlighted just moments later. He argues that she killed children, while Jon himself had a child murdered. And he killed the Night's Watch because they defied him for their own beliefs. Instead of making this episode about Daenerys' madness, they make it about how rule by monarch is evil. Where did this come from? And why did they elect the next monarch? A monarch with no army, a Stark. And his first move is to divide the Seven Kingdoms by giving the North its freedom. Now, these lords must go back to their kingdoms and argue that their sacrifice isn't worth freedom. How long will that actually last? Think about what each kingdom has lost. Bran is a sitting target with no protection. And did I mention that he's a Stark? The first time an election arises, war will break out, if not much, much sooner. Daenerys would have prevented all of this. And her arguments, when listened to, are no different than even the most just rulers throughout history.
Whew, Sean, I got nothing to say. I think you hit it dead center. That's a bullseye. I agree with everything you said.
Yeah, if you could imagine Daenerys's rule, if she hadn't had that really, really ill-timed speech in front of the Dothraki and the Unsullied, maybe if she just hung out on the Red Keep for a while, written some letters, maybe he had a good minister of propaganda, maybe if Tyrion was doing his fucking job and made it look like, hey, everybody, you're liberated. Go out in the streets, throw some food at people, give them coin, whatever. Do some spins. Cersei would have done it. Littlefinger would have done it. A competent leader would have done it. Instead, you go out on the steps and you do some sort of Hitlerian, military rally. Not a great idea. So, Sean, I agree with you. I would have liked to see what peace that Daenerys might have spread across the realm. And again, I think pointing to Aegon is a really great example of Aegon the Conqueror is considered a hero in the books. Daenerys could have been the same.
Mm-hmm.
And the final Jon Snow email comes from Michael from Venice. He says, hey guys, Tyrion's little speech about the power of stories and how Bran should rule because his story is so great. Sansa and Arya have great stories. Fuck, Jon was the bastard son who came back from the dead and became king of the North, who turns out to be the rightful heir to the throne, and by the way, can ride a fucking dragon? Now that's a story. Michael from Venice.
Michael, you got a great point there, especially at the Kingsmoot. When they're like, hey, who could lead? I don't know anybody. Does anybody know of a leader around here? Somebody at least should have thrown it out there. I know that Grey Worm wouldn't have wanted to hear it, but you should say, hey, Jon, we've known him to be a level-headed leader who cares about his people. You could have at least thrown it out there. But no, they just chose to, hey, just leave him in the cell. We'll sacrifice him.
Yeah, Tyrion, maybe stick up for the guy who saved your fucking life.
Yes. Exactly.
I did think they were going to go there with that, though. I really did think that's how it was going to end. They were going to be like, Jon would make a great king. And then he's like, I pardoned myself. The end.
Exactly.
Thanks, Michael, for your email. Next up, we have a very special email that comes in from a longtime listener, first time on the podcast. It's Derek English. And Derek writes in, I really hope one of these days you guys read at least one of my emails on air. I poured out a few during season 2 of Westworld, and then a few more during this season of Game of Thrones. I know what I'm talking about more than most do, but for some reason, you always seem to skip my letters, and I'm starting to feel like it's the same people week after week who get the airtime. Come on. Anyway, here are some observations and theories about episode 5 and 6. I believe that Bran may have been warging Drogon during the majority of the immolation of King's Landing. Did you notice that we rarely saw Daenerys' reactions of her point of view? I'm no Daenerys apologist, but that may be an awfully good third twist if you ask me. Well, that's it for this email. Hopefully, you will at least read on air something I wrote. Be well, Derek English.
Derek, keep them coming, buddy. You're getting there.
Oh, he did, Big D.
He did?
Oh, yeah. He wrote another one prior to the finale and said, hey, guys, rumor has it Jaime may not be dead. If you search the internet, you'll see what I mean. Most of the theories around this are based upon exit interviews the cast took part in. So, how did he survive? I think if, and a big if, he survived, he did so by jumping inside a dragon skull while the building crumbled. Think about it. In the opening credits, we get a shot of dragon skulls below the Red Keep. Tyrion mentions them as well. Those references have never been paid off. Again, this is all a big if. Derek English.
I think Derek's cracked the case. I like it. Keep them coming, Derek.
Oh, he did.
Oh.
And finally, there was another one today from Derek that said, I just wanted to point out something that isn't being talked about much. For almost a decade, the names Daenerys and Khaleesi were two of the most popular names for both children and pets. While having a pet named after Daenerys wouldn't be so bad, there are hundreds of thousands of girls, now aged 0 to 10, who are named after a mass murdering queen of fictional lore. I'm sure that none of the people who chose to name their children Khaleesi or Daenerys envisioned such a turn, but regardless, we can all use this as a cautionary example. Wait until you're sure which side the coin lands on before naming your children after fictional characters.
I still think Daenerys or Khaleesi is better than naming them after like a car. Like Porsche, Mercedes. Like that's worse.
I want to point out that most people named Portia are named after the Shakespearean character Portia.
I don't think that Mercedes was in any Shakespearean plays. Was she?
No, but Mercedes is a name that predates the car.
I'm pretty sure that Mercedes is named after the car. But Derek says hundreds of thousands of girls. Is that accurate? Can we validate that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the case. But my favorite part of this email is actually a part I didn't read, which is that Derek named his son Peyton after Peyton Manning, which seems like a pretty safe choice. His kid's 9 years old now, and if he asks, why am I named after Peyton Manning? You go, oh, Peyton Manning's a football star. He's smart, he's rich, he's funny, he's a nice guy. It seems like a safe choice.
Yeah, is he from Indianapolis?
No, he's from Pittsburgh.
Oh no! Oh, I guess you don't want to name your kid Big Ben.
No, definitely not.
That might have some bad connotations. But Derek, we love you. Please keep the emails coming. We would never omit you. We read every email. We love it. Just sometimes different things get factored into who gets read. But today, it was all about you. It's all about Derek. And please, Derek, enter our rewriting the Game of Thrones season or seasons or episode. Please enter that. 500 words. I think you'd be perfect for it.
Thanks, Derek, so much for writing in and for listening. We'll see you for Westworld Season 3. All right. Moving on to Emily J., who wrote in and said, in an age of peak TV where we have immense quality standards but are flooded with mediocre streaming shows, what lessons can the future storytellers take from Game of Thrones last season? One might be your audience cares about world building, and when the world is huge, you don't ever stop. We want social mores, histories, and prophecies, and the inside look into interpersonal dynamics. The Expanse builds on our existing universe by explaining the air filtration system on an asteroid, or the political ramifications of governing a solar system from Earth. And like space, there is more and more to show, tell, sing, or even dance before we ever get to the specific space mission. Painting those pictures gives the plot something to build from, because even when the plot is done, the world is still there. That's from Emily J. in Richmond, Virginia.
So, Emily, I like your take here, and I'll be interested to go back and watch the last two seasons. Let's binge them, that we don't have to wait the time between episodes and season, to see if we view the rushed plot the same way.
Thanks, Emily, for writing in. Next, we have an email from listener Nick, who's talking about George R.R. Martin's vision of showing the human heart in conflict. He says, George R.R. Martin has always said the only thing worth writing about is the heart in conflict with itself. And after watching the penultimate episode of the series, this has been illustrated. When looking at our main characters in King's Landing, Jon, Tyrion, Jaime, Cersei, Arya, and Daenerys, All these characters have been presented with choices where in their heart they know the outcome of either choice, but because of a major character flaw they have, they pick what they perceive as the wrong choice. Jon has always lived by a strict, unwavering moral code that was instilled in him by Ned Stark growing up. After the long night, when he is presented with a choice while encountering Daenerys, he has to make the decision to either be honorable and not keep secrets from his family, or hide his true identity to not risk the aftermath of what will happen if the secret gets out. Tyrion, after being sentenced to death by his own father and being betrayed by everyone except his brother and his best friend Varys, feels he had nothing to live for after his escape and tries to drink himself into an early grave. Varys then succeeds in helping Tyrion find someone to believe in who can change the world through her justice and kind-heartedness. When Daenerys shows signs of her unhinging and Varys suggests that she is past the point of no return, Tyrion refuses to let go of his support for Daenerys and betrays Varys despite knowing that Varys makes a very valid argument. Jaime, at his core, is addicted to Cersei the way a drug addict is addicted to cocaine. He is fully aware she is bad for him, yet he cannot resist going back to her. Jaime has always wanted to be honorable and good, yet the only thing that holds him back is Cersei. If you notice, every evil thing he has done in the show and books had to do with Cersei. Cersei is as ruthless as she is vulnerable. However, she makes extensive efforts to hide her fear while in front of her enemies. Her stubbornness and pride blind her judgment. We see a little of this when she comes into contact with the Faith, but this is on full display when she executes Missandei. Cersei knows exactly that the option Tyrion proposed to her would save the life of her child and herself, but her hubris causes her to choose the decision that risked everything she still cared about. Arya has been on a revenge tour ever since her father was executed, adding names to her list as the seasons went on. This seems to be her only objective in the show, to cross out every name. And just like everyone else, she is confronted with a choice. Does she die trying to kill an already doomed Cersei, or does she let it go and try to live a life of peace? Unlike the other major characters of the show, Arya is the only one to forsake her main goal or character flaw and does not follow Sandor to certain death. Lastly is Daenerys. Knowing what it's like to be on the run most of her life, she has experienced oppression. This gives her compassion for the misfortunate and inspires her to want to change the world and make it a better place to live in. Dany learns to rule in Essos and learns the complexity of being a leader. Dany's main flaw, however, is her impulsivity and violent nature, which gets checked by her advisors throughout the show. Her real test comes when most of her support gets vanquished by the Night King and Cersei, and she is pushed to the wall. After the Lannister army surrenders, Dany has a choice to make. Does she give in to her provoked anger from all that has happened to her this whole show, or does she check her impulses and spare the innocent? Dany chooses to instill fear through fire and blood. Emilia Clarke described Dany's impulsivity as a diabetic or a person trying to lose weight eating cake. You know you're not supposed to eat it, but being the human that you are, you just give in. Game of Thrones feels like a character study of the human mind and how the decisions we make lead to our ultimate fates. It's our very nature that either leads us to peace and harmony or violence and pain. And that comes from Nick.
Listening to how he breaks it down, we understand their motivations. We understand what they've gone through. He humanizes them. He makes a comment, though, that I want to address about Jaime Lannister, that everything Jaime's done, the bad things, is for Cersei. That's not true. Do you remember when he was captured by the North and he decided to kill his own cousin, Alton, to escape? Not everything was done, out of his love. But these complex characters who we would almost know what they were going to do, what they were thinking. We've gotten inside their heads so much. You can't deny that there was a change. So whether it was going away from George's belief in having the heart dictate what characters do, and the double Ds were more logical to get them to an end point within the plot in the show, I don't know. But you did a beautiful job describing why we loved all these characters and why each one was so lovable in their own way, even though they were greatly flawed.
And there's more to Nick's email, which was basically an essay. And you can find it all at shadowontv.com under the small council. Again, all these emails have been shortened to save time, but you can read the entire thing and comment on it, shadowontv.com under the Game of Thrones small council. I'm also there commenting and interacting with the audience, so join us over there. And if you didn't hear your email on the podcast, you can also find it there with our replies as well. Next up, we have one from Angela, who's writing in about Sansa. She says, as for Sansa finishing as the Queen of the North, did anyone else cry at the moment she's putting on her dress? That was beautifully sequined in leaves falling and snow embroidered. I felt this was such a winning moment for the female power that everyone has been so upset about with Cersei and Dany. Cersei and Dany are an exact presentation of a poor picture of women in authority. The reason I say this is because they have an expectation by their family name to give them the life they deserve. Granted, their lives have been less than ideal. I still think Sansa is a better representation. Female fans have been complaining as to how unfair it is that these powerful women didn't get their position on the throne. But to be honest, I would have hated that. Sansa is exactly what we women fight for today. We want respect to begin with. We want people to look at us as equal from the beginning. Sansa didn't have to force her respect on the people. They saw that she was capable, and she took what was right for the people. Her journey was worse than Daenerys, forced into marriage twice, beaten, raped, all while thinking her family is dead. Daenerys could argue the same, but she had lovers. She grew to love Khal Drogo, and she decided her path once she reached her protected authority in Meereen. Sansa was forced into her circumstances with no way out, and she had to fight for where she is. She didn't force her authority. She even appealed to Daenerys to consider letting the North be independent, and Dany refused. Sansa's fought against all odds and even fought against women in the show, and she landed on top to represent a woman who is capable of ruling a kingdom, not because she has a name, but because she truly loves her people as her family and her own.
So I want to address the beginning when you talked about your emotions as Sansa gets her dress on and the coronation. The money and effort that goes into the show, a majority of it you don't even notice. Sansa's dress, we see it for a couple minutes on screen. It's beautiful, but I went and actually researched it. And the level of detail that went into this dress, that dress is actually made from the very same fabric, which was Marjorie's wedding dress to Joffrey. And I'm going to read the description here from the post of the artist who actually made the dress. Sansa had her bond to Marjorie. It has fallen leaves in the pattern of the weirwood. There is the feathers and embroidered direwolf across her shoulders, and not seen here but the beautiful red beaded leaves falling from one of her sleeves. The sleeves are textured like fur on the first sigil. The metal bodice features the growing branches of the weirwood tree. The crown is two howling direwolves. Nothing is created without meaning. The small direwolf head is propping the other one up, a gesture we'd like to believe signals how the last of the Stark children all supported each other and helped keep their great house alive through the turmoil of the final wars on the Game of Thrones. The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Sansa Stark, the Queen of the North, honors her late father's words with these two direwolves on her crown. Long may she reign. So every detail, something you see on screen for just a couple of seconds, probably took somebody 3 months to make. And the significance and the callback to other moments and relationships throughout the shows, it's so beautiful. A majority of the work that goes in the show, you just never even notice.
So Big D, a few months back, I did this thing called the Orkmoot, and it was part Dungeons and Dragons, part adult summer camp. It's part of a game called Hunters of Avalon. You guys can check it out at huntersofavalon.com. And on there, you got bonus inspiration points, basically, that would help you out in the game if you arrived in costume. So for the entire weekend, I had my sword and my armor on and try to stay in costume as best I could, despite getting very, very drunk and falling out of a Boy Scout bunk. But regardless, if you have ever tried to put on armor or go to the Renfest and then you see the people who are doing it right, you're like, holy shit, like that is dedication. And this montage we had of the Stark children with Arya, with Sansa, with Jon, preparing for their futures as they were gearing up. This was like costume and prop porn. Arya sheathing needle, the spyglass, the armor being fitted, and then the beauty of Sansa's dress. I mean, I think I said out loud, my God, when they flashed to it being pulled on her, that sleeve going up her arm, and then when you saw the embroidery of the leaves, it's really, really impressive. I hope that at some point we have an opportunity at a museum somewhere in America to see all the pieces of the costuming from Game of Thrones, because that's something that's worth seeing in real life. I can't believe the care and detail they put into it.
Yeah, I think her outfit, it's up there with the artistry that we think of creating Drogon. You have to be a master in your craft So that explains why Sophie Turner was so upset with the petition and people like saying that the last season was half-assed. You can understand when she saw the detail up close, what went into it, how it would upset her.
Thanks, Angela, for your attention to detail. Next up, we have one from Bob Jenkins. Says, is Tyrion the most deceptively self-serving character since the High Sparrow? Tyrion gets an undeserving redemption story, while Lord Varys gets roasted and Jon gets exiled. Ultimately, you may say that he played the game smarter than Varys or Jon, but I need someone else in the podcast community to acknowledge how much of a shitty, self-serving bastard he is. He is loyal to Dany all throughout, enables her without firmly disagreeing with her like Varys would. He gives her poor tactical advice, causing her to suffer loss, and disregards the final warnings of Varys. He only seems to be strong about his reservations and is openly defiant after his family has finally died. For one, the show keeps trying to have us believe that he loves his sister when this is far from what we saw in earlier seasons. In fact, she hates him more than ever before. So why does he repeatedly try to save her? It can even be argued that if it wasn't for Tyrion freeing Jaime, that Jaime would still be alive. Let's say Jaime and Cersei both survived the King's Landing attack, and Daenerys imprisoned them instead of killing them, and forgives Tyrion for freeing his brother. Would he throw down his pin, quit, and plot her death? No, he would go on serving. It's only when his life is in immediate jeopardy that he sees the sudden urge for Jon to murder Daenerys immediately with the most desperate beg during the prison cell visit. For someone with no balls, Varys at least was able to take it like a man, whereas Tyrion is squirming himself out of a situation again undeservedly. He doesn't say, let's wait a week or a month. He wants Jon to act urgently only because his life depends on it. During the final trial, he doesn't even put in one good word for Jon, the same Jon who pled with Daenerys to release Tyrion. He doesn't even mention how Jon is really and truly a rightful king. How about I, Tyrion, take the black and let Jon be king, or at least serve on the council? Tyrion is just as guilty as Jon, disobeying his queen by releasing Jaime, conspiring to have Daenerys killed. I wonder if that ever got mentioned, or does Jon bear the full brunt of the blame? To top it all off, he comes into the trial as a prisoner and gets to influence the council on who should be king? What the fuck? Of course, he wouldn't choose anybody that had punished him, like Yara. He conveniently chooses Bran because he has a, quote, good story and his testicles don't work. If those are the requirements for king, then I might as well smash my balls and I'm half qualified to rule a monarch. And that comes from Bob Jenkins.
Yeah, Bob, I think you've hit on something. We kind of hand wave it and we allow it because we like him. We like Peter Dinklage. But Jon references a quote that he had been told early on at the Wall, that love is the death of duty. And Tyrion had confessed his love for Daenerys. So it wasn't always his belief in her as the best ruler or her benevolent intentions. I think there was also the fact that he emotionally loved her that allowed him to cloud his judgment. Like maybe he thought there was hope. And then he kicks back to, well, sometimes duty is the death of love. So I think even in the end, he's not owning the fact that he is probably responsible for most of the bad things that happened.
I think Tyrion is the superior thinker, though, and he operates in a gray area, which is sometimes hard to comprehend in a binary situation. But Tyrion has demonstrated that he probably cares more about the people than any character except maybe Varys. He's evolved greatly as a character. And I think that you see on his face as he moves through King's Landing at times when there's nobody around but him, that he is genuinely pained by the things that he sees. He seems to have a greater sensitivity and comprehension of what's going on around him. And I'm sure as we're reading this, there's tons of listeners who are infuriated by this accusation even. So all the Tyrion fans out there, write in, host at shadontv.com. It's not too late to get your opinions heard. Next up, we have one from another Bob, Robert Kennington, who says, why did the show end when it did? Anyone watching could easily see that the last 2 seasons could have had 10 episodes, and we still could have done more seasons without it feeling prolonged. A lot of shows are dragged on too long and diminish over time as the network tries to drain every dollar out of the show. The Office, That 70s Show, etc. I feel like almost every problem me and others have had with this season could have been solved with more time, as everything was rushed, and so plot points didn't hit home, and scenes we as the audience needed to see to understand how Daenerys could turn weren't there. As far as I know, there is no definite answer to why the show ended. These are the most popular reasons I have heard. 1, the show ran out of money. It was the most expensive show ever, but also the most popular. Unless HBO was tapped, I don't see it. 2, the actors were done with the show. As with any popular show, this one has propelled the acting careers of its main cast. I don't buy this, as it isn't like these characters were Will Smith after Fresh Prince. They could have killed off a character or two and continued. And I've never heard any of the actors say it was time to end it. 3, the Double Ds were tired of making the show and dedicating 365 days a year to working on this show. This seems to be the most likely reason, but as they rarely ever give interviews or do public appearances, it's still unknown. Maybe they got tired of not having the source material they were promised from George. It's hard for me to imagine them being okay with rushing the ending like it was, though. 4, George wanted the show to end. Maybe he was tired of the show being ahead of the books, which I guess makes sense, although his writer's block is the reason it happened. Maybe he felt like book readers wouldn't be happy if the show ended differently from his books. Maybe he wanted to test out the ending on the show to see how fans reacted. And that comes from Robert Kennington.
So if George felt pressure to finish the books before the end of the show, how do you think the response of the viewers of the show are going to impact him? He's got to be feeling the pressure 10 times more now.
I was reading Big D, a article on digitalspy.com, and it talks about whose decision it was to end Game of Thrones when it ended. And it's definitely not a money thing. HBO basically said, here's a blank check. You guys do the show. But it was the Double Ds, and there's a quote from producer Brian Cogman. He says, there's probably a world where we could have milked this thing for another 8 seasons, and that would have been very lucrative for all of us. But Benioff and Weiss really wanted to go out on a good high point. And Benioff said HBO would have been happy for the show to keep going, to have more episodes in the final season. We always believed it was about 73 hours, and it will be roughly that. As much as they wanted more, meaning HBO, they understood that this is where the story ends. So this was definitely the Double D's idea to cut it off when it cut off. HBO would have been very happy to keep going.
But what's disturbing is the fact that it was this arbitrary 73 hours. He didn't say, this is where the story logically should end. We mapped it out. This is how long it would fit. They just set this time limit and how long it should be, and they were going to stick to it. It sounds like a cop-out.
Yeah, it's not like Carnival, another show that I absolutely loved. Carnival, they said, okay, we have an arc of, I think it was like 5 years that they wanted to do. This is where the story runs, and when it's over, it's over. And they never got to those 5 years, but they had a vision for how long it would be. American Gods is another example of that. So basically, it's been decided that they have a story arc. They want to get to a certain point, and it's going to take a certain amount of seasons. And if they run out of runway, they do, but they're not going to rush the ending. It's just going to be the end is the end. But it's not like they sat down and said, it's this many hours. They just know how long the story runs. The end of it was already written before they started.
I think it's a completely inverse way of thinking that they set a time and said, we have to fit everything in. And it just hurts the legacy of the show, because it will come out that it has to be their arbitrary decision to stay to the 73 hours that force them to cram things in. Because even your breakdown, even giving it 2-3 more episodes, you could have done so much more, but they, for some reason, felt it was important to stick to 73.
And I think the silver lining here is that we still have the books. The books will still be written, hopefully completely finished. But I can tell you, if you've never read the books, and if you're not a book reader, audiobooks are fine too. Go back, read the books, or experience the audiobooks. There is so much more going on. Characters that we never saw before, incidents that never happened on the show, prophecies and backstories, and so much inner monologue that never was expressed in the show. It's almost like getting its own show separate from Game of Thrones. So definitely check it out. I can't recommend it enough. And the audiobooks, if you hate our pronunciation of shit, you're going to love the audiobooks. Next up, we have one from Laurel from Chicagoland, who writes in, Dany accomplishes her goal of breaking the wheel, but paid a price for it. I really see King Bran the Broken not only as possibly a symbol of breaking the wheel since he is a cripple, but also as a figurehead ruler and someone who has thousands of years of history that he can access to help the new council not have history keep repeating itself. I see Tyrion, as evidenced by the final scene of the new council, as the main power and decision maker. In this small group, There's a collection of underdogs more reminiscent of a group of traveling carnies than heads of all the noble houses of Westeros. We have an imp leading a mercenary, a freakishly tall woman, a smart but cowardly overweight chump, a bastard blacksmith, and a smuggler who is missing some of his fingers as the main power players in the new King's Landing, or what's left of it. None of them have children that we're aware of, or even relationships, with the exception of Samwell and Gilly. They tend to be singular folks. Maybe the whole love ends with duty, duty ends with love thing. They are less corruptible because most of these individuals are not driven by power, and then maybe are less likely to be blinded by love. Just a thought.
I think it's uncomfortable. Yes, you're comparing them to carnies. I think they're on the small council because we're familiar with them. These are characters that we've grown to love. We spent time with them. Samwell, I'm sorry, there's no way he deserves to have the highest post in the Six Kingdoms. The Citadel was untouched by this war. You think all of a sudden they're completely cool with Samwell, who broke his oath, stole some books, hasn't completed his training. You're going to put him at the highest position? That's not realistic. Then you have Bronn, who we love, who's fun. He's a criminal. And you put him in charge of the Master of Coin? It's a joke. They're there because we know them. Davos, Tyrion, those are really the only ones who belong to be there. The rest are there just because we're cool and that's the gang. Let's have it fun. Let's joke about brothels. Woo! Please, go back and look at Tywin's small council. That was all about business. This is about hijinks and like a sitcom. This is like you made a Friends small council. It was comical.
Can you imagine how awkward it would be if they're like, we need a master of war, and Grey Worm was still around? Like, hey, Grey Worm, sorry about all that.
Whoops. Yeah.
He's got the helmet back on, just staring.
Yeah, what the fuck's a master of whisperers going to do? You have Bran, the master of whisperers. What's he going to do?
He's just going to report to Bran. Bran's going to go, no, wrong.
Yeah, you're wrong.
Sorry.
Piece of shit. You're fired. He's just going to keep running through people.
They couldn't even bother to fill those two seats with someone maybe we didn't know. Like someone who's just a logical choice who'd worked their way up through the bureaucracy, put in their hours, a real statesman, you know?
I think it would also be great if Bran answered every question with, I know. If when they said, are we going to appoint some people? They said, yes, we're going to interview people in the next week. And Bran would go, yes, I know. Every question. You just answer, yes, I know.
Yeah, why does he even need to actually physically be there?
Oh.
Can't he just watch the meeting?
Yeah, he knows what's going to be said.
Yeah. When meetings can be replaced by emails, it's Bran. And finally, before we move on to the actuallys, we have a great email from listener Brooke from Cleveland, who writes in, the ending of Game of Thrones is bittersweet, particularly for me. My dad was a huge Game of Thrones fan. After hating the show at first, he slowly started asking questions and eventually was hooked. He watched it constantly on repeat. I can't tell you how many times. Bought himself a Targaryen t-shirt, even though he was obviously House Stark. The whole 9 yards. He passed away in 2016 from cancer and didn't get to see the last 2 seasons. I mourn the ending of Game of Thrones, but I try to celebrate it in my dad's memory. George always told us the ending was bittersweet. He turned fantasy novel tropes on their head. Things we thought were important weren't. Characters we thought weren't important shaped the course of history. Daenerys, the queen that everyone loved, ended up a ruthless murderer. The hero of Westeros, Jon Snow, ends up in exile, but ultimately free to hang out with his BFF Tormund and Ghost. Bran, the crippled boy, is now king. Who better to rule than the kid who literally knows everything that ever happened and the consequences? Sansa is queen in the north. The details of her dress are amazing and worthy of an email all its own. We got that. Arya is now Arya the Explorer. As Bran said, everything that happened got us to where we need to be. Also, how do we miss the biggest hint in all of Game of Thrones of what was to come? That Bran's direwolf was named Summer. He named his direwolf after having one of his first dreams of the three-eyed raven. It's as if the seed was planted in Bran's head from the very start, but it just took him a while to realize it. It was right in front of our faces the whole time. After winter and a dream of spring comes the long summer. And that's from Brooke in Cleveland. Well, Brooke, we send our love out to you, your boyfriend, Vince, who commissioned The Natural for Shat the Movies. and your dad, thanks so much for joining us for the podcast and being fans of the show. We hope that being part of our family and enjoying Game of Thrones with us has at least filled some of that gap for you. And it's wonderful that you can celebrate the show in your dad's memory. As for the flipping of fantasy novel tropes, I think you're absolutely right. You know, the show that we got from the Double Ds is on record as being based on plot points set out by George R.R. Martin, at least the majority of. And although this might have not been the most airtight execution, I don't think it's that big a disaster, at least not as big a disaster as people are making out to be. One thing to remember is, as I watched through the early seasons, I hadn't read the books at the time, and I thought they were really good seasons. After reading the books, I can even go back and watch the early seasons and go, oh man, I really wish they would have emphasized this part or that part. And so a departure from the novels has always been there, and it might be a little more glaring now because we don't have the novels in hand. But I'm glad you had the insight to note that the major movements that are executed on this show are pretty impressive. It's not the kind of TV that we're used to seeing. And even though it's closer to major Hollywood stuff and network TV than we got in earlier seasons, this is still remarkably different. And I think we'll realize that as we move on from Game of Thrones and try to look for the next big thing, that the drop in quality will be apparent and we're all going to feel it. And speaking of drops in quality, now it's time for the actually. So the actually is our listeners' way of correcting us on things that we said when we misspoke or were just completely wrong. If you have an actually, go ahead and write us at hosts@shadowontv.com or tweet at us with actually somewhere in your subject line or your tweet, and we will check it out and possibly read it on the podcast. The first actually comes from Cassie. She says, hey guys, I'm almost positive that it was snowing in King's Landing. Actually, I'm not saying that there isn't ash, but I don't believe it's ash falling from the sky. I think it's snow. I'm more convinced when Jon is walking to the Red Keep and Drogon is under a mound of snow, ash. To me, it sounded like snow and ice was cracking and falling off him when he gets up to greet Jon. Then they jump forward a few months, and as Jon rides beyond the wall, you see a flower starting to bloom, hinting that winter is done and spring has begun.
So I think that was done just for the effect. You know, they wanted to really give it this dark and gloomy feel. But if you remember, only maybe an hour or two before this, Euron was on his ship blocking the sun out. It was a beautiful, looked like a summer day. You know, as the Golden Company came out, I think some of the Northmen were wearing short sleeves. It looked like a beautiful day. So there's no way that the temperature dropped. Jon would have immediately thought, holy shit, where's the Night King? What just happened? The weather changed. Yeah, they went a little hard. They went a little over the top on the ash because, come on, it wouldn't have covered it. It wouldn't have kept falling for hours.
Some listeners wrote in after episode 5 and talked about, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think that idea of a nuclear winter as well and having fallout from all the dust and particulate matter that's up in the air, I think also had something to do with it, Cassie. So I agree with Big D. I don't think it was actually snow, although I did look it up and it can snow in King's Landing. I just don't think that winter arrived overnight. And then you see a couple weeks later that it's all gone. So I think it was ash, just a shit ton of it. And I think it was meant to emphasize how much destruction there actually was. Thanks for writing in. Our next actually comes from B in Oregon, who says, hey guys, when Gene was talking about Jon and Tyrion going up the steps to meet Cersei, actually what he meant to say was go meet Dany. Just kidding. Everyone knows you meant Dany. If someone emails you again with a name correction as obvious as this, tell them to pound sand on behalf of me. Do they think the rest of the people listening are saying, oh, it makes so much more sense now? And that comes from B in Oregon. Well, to the other 7 people who wrote in about me saying Cersei instead of Dany, pound sand on behalf of B.
Yeah, fucking B. You tell them.
All right. Next up, we have an actually from Martin Lyons, no relation, who says, hey guys, Dick started last night's Instacast with a rant about Euron being the one and only person to be in the right place to fight Jaime. But I don't think this is fair. Actually, the Iron Fleet had been destroyed by a dragon. Everyone in the water would see that this dragon was now attacking King's Landing. Everyone but Euron would therefore have chosen to swim anywhere but toward the dragon. Euron alone would swim to King's Landing to save Cersei, or at least his unborn child. He even taunted Jaime that he would take his head to Cersei, so it's clear he knew the same secret way as Jaime. It's not just logical, it's likely that they would meet at some point on the route up to Cersei, and the beach encounter is therefore not a problem to me, plot-wise.
Okay, so the fleet's now been attacked by a dragon. You're in the water. It would make logical sense that you would swim to the closest land because you're dressed in leather, some heavy fabrics. Euron comes out of the water completely clothed, right? He has to come out of the water at the closest point so he could survive. He's not going to swim the extra mile to get to that exact entrance, but that's not what happened. We didn't say Euron come walking up the beach line to that secret cave entrance. He swam out right there. That's convenient. No one else, no other troop said, hey guys, let's follow our leader Euron. Well, granted, they can't talk because they have no tongues, but they would say, and follow him there. It's illogical. There's no way he was the only survivor. That was the closest point to where his ship went down. Come on, it was a plot device.
Now, Martin, this is the best explanation I've seen, though, of why Euron and Jaime might have run into each other. So kudos to you for trying. And finally, we have an actually from Steve Tyson. And just a warning, if you have children in the car, well, they shouldn't be listening to this podcast anyway, but if you have children in the car, you might want to stop the podcast now or just, hang them out the window or something like that. But this one is about something I said. So Steve Tyson writes in and says, I did just want to mention that I think last week, Gene used the word cocksucker on one of the shows. I know you totally didn't mean it like this, but that word has a long-standing negative connotation against gay men. Basically, it makes it sound like any man who sucks cocks is inferior. Just something to be mindful about. And that comes from Steve Tyson. Steve, I'm so glad you wrote this in because this is an education for me. So I'm going to say a couple other words on the podcast that I never say in conversation. I never say to myself. And those words are gay and retard when used in the pejorative sense, right? Like when someone says that's retarded or that's gay. And the King B and I argue about this all the time. And South Park, I think, did a big episode on it. And people are like, oh, well, yeah, I guess it makes sense. It's okay to say gay or retarded. No, it's not. And here's why. It's exactly what you said, Steve, is that when you say gay as a pejorative, like that's gay, but you mean negative, then you're equating being gay with something negative. Likewise, with saying something's retarded, you're basically saying that thing is stupid or bad, inferior in a way. And so for cocksucker, it's a lot like pussy. I used to say pussy all the time because I literally thought it was referring to a cat. Like that guy is a pussy, like a scaredy cat. No. I didn't realize that pussy was in reference to a vagina, which is completely inappropriate. And so the same with this. For cocksucker, I was just like, oh yeah, like it sucks cock, like eating dick, fucking butt, like whatever. Not thinking about the fact that it was a connotation toward homosexuality because I just figured, everybody sucks cocks. But you're absolutely right. In looking it up, doing some research, I saw that Anderson Cooper very eloquently explained why it's an inappropriate term. And it's not something I'll be using again, which will be very tempting when Deadwood, the movie, comes out.
I hate to bring it up again, but I don't remember the context. Where did you use cocksucker?
I don't recall, but I know I did because during the edit, I was like, ooh, is cocksucker okay? Should I bleep it? Should I cut it? But I wasn't thinking of it from a homosexual sense. I just didn't know if it was like pushing it too far. Yeah,
but unless you said he is a cocksucker. Cocksucker could be anybody. The act of sucking cock, I don't think that's, automatically a derogatory term towards homosexuals.
Right, but it's basically saying that anybody who sucks cock is inferior. And who are the
why?
people? So who are the people who suck cock? It'd be homosexuals and women. So basically you're saying that you're painting anybody who blows somebody in a negative light. Cocksucker is not a positive thing. You don't say, wow, what a beautiful day. This one's going to be a real cocksucker.
Okay, point taken.
So anyway, Steve, thank you so much for writing in, and thank you for everyone who writes in and gives us the benefit of the doubt. I really appreciate it because I swear to you, we're good dudes. We're not trying to be assholes. And thank you for everyone for giving us the benefit of the doubt and having patience with us. As Big D has said before, this is something like the 20-somethingth hour of Game of Thrones that we recorded this season, we're bound to say something stupid. We're human. We make mistakes, and we hope you forgive us for it.
Yeah, that is a guarantee. We will say stupid stuff.
All right, moving on from the email, it's time for the voicemail portion of the podcast. And Big D, you've got a few great ones for us tonight.
I do. And first off, I want to mention that Buck called in from Ohio, and he wanted to wish you, Gene, a happy Goth Day.
Thanks, Buck.
I don't know when that was or what's involved in Goth Day, but somehow Buck knew it, and he wanted to make sure that you would have a good, happy Goth Day.
Yeah, International Goth Day is May 22nd. So it's actually official World Goth Day. It's the day where the goth scene gets to celebrate its own being and an opportunity to make its presence known to the rest of the world. It started in the UK in 2009. So thanks, Buck.
So our first voicemail comes from Tani, all the way in Scotland.
Hi guys, it's Tammy calling all the way from Bonnie, Scotland, and it's just around the Game of Thrones final episode. So first of all, I just want to say that I love the show that you guys do. It's brilliant. It's a highlight of every single time an episode finishes. I love listening to you guys. I just wanted to say I wasn't loving Dany's arc so far. However, this last episode kind of sold it to me, I guess. I love the callbacks to what Lady Olenna had said, to Dany, that she needs to stop listening to the men, the smart, quote-unquote, smart men around her, and she needs to be a dragon. And we sort of saw that in this episode, didn't we? Dany has consistently ignored the advice of those around her, and even in this episode we saw the wings extending out behind her in what was quite obviously one of the most beautiful shots of the episode, I think. I thought it was really well done. Anyway, I just wanted to know what your thoughts were around if Lady Olenna's words really sunk into Dany, and if you think that played a part and how this all panned out. I wanted to know your thoughts. Thanks again for an awesome podcast. And I'll catch you guys maybe whenever I come to New York. I'll come and see if I can find you. How creepy is that? Anyway, thanks guys. Bye.
So Tawny, we've mentioned it before, and I don't know if we've mentioned it on this podcast, but Gene and I, in the 3 years that we've been doing podcasts, we have physically been in the same room for maybe, 4 hours?
Something like that, yeah.
I didn't meet Gene physically until this year. Every time we record, I am in Orlando, Florida. Gene is in Arizona. So every time it seems like we're in the same room talking to each other, we're split across the country, and we've actually only met once.
And the time that we did meet, I was drunk for more than half of it, and the rest of the time I was screaming. So it didn't really work out so well. I think we're a little doomed in that sense.
No, but it was odd. It was like we were long distance dating. It was Carrie Gross told me, she goes, "You won't believe it. Gene was nervous." He was like, well, what if I don't like Big D? What if he doesn't like me? It was the strangest thing, because Gene and I have probably talked for hundreds of hours. We know each other very, very well. We know things about each other that you probably family members don't know. But once we got into that same room, it was like we were on the podcast. Everything was cool. But it was that odd feeling like you were meeting your long distance like pen pal, or like you were meeting your bride from Siberia.
As for Lady Olenna's words to Daenerys, prior to this final episode, I had seen memes that reference back to it, and I thought, wow, that's a great callback. The fact that she has put aside all of the garbage that's been fed to her and embraced the fact that she is a dragon, she is a conqueror. And I held out hope until the last second that we were going to see a projection of Daenerys' power that frightened us. And then in that scene where she and Jon were together at last, and she seems to warm to him and she's talking about her childhood, that we would realize that our misgivings were unfounded. That it was our reaction to seeing a woman wielding tremendous power who had been wronged, and the vicious justice that could come of that, but not necessarily someone who is power drunk and some sort of a despot. I loved the idea, and I was in love with the idea of this, not a redemption arc for Daenerys necessarily, but just a different way of looking at a leader, somebody powerful and a fulfillment of destiny. It's not quite what we got, but I'm not disappointed in the show.
All right, our next voicemail comes from Tom in West Michigan.
Hey guys, Tom from Michigan. Just listened to your recap of the Instacast of last episode of Game of Thrones. There's a couple things. Love how cinematically beautiful this episode was. The Targaryen banner flapping against what's left of the Red Keep, the Unsullied assembled, and Jon coming up the stairs, or even the march into the what used to be the throne room. Just cinematically, just absolutely stunning. From a writing perspective, I truly feel like I'm going to wear my tinfoil hat here and say that there's got to be some little club of screenwriters of shows that have been socially significant over the years, whether it's Seinfeld or Sopranos or Lost, Game of Thrones, etc., that just get together and say, hey, you got a socially significant show? Let's fucking ruin it. Let's ruin it in one episode, and here's how you do it. And they get some little, pin or something. Definitely not the way that they should have wrapped this show up. I truly feel like if we had 3 more episodes, they could have expanded on some of these things and maybe made it make more sense. But instead of breaking the wheel, all they did was put wheels on the throne. Bran sat by for however many seasons and knew what was going on and just kind of sat by and let everybody die and let everybody do their thing just so that he could be taken down to King's Landing and be king. We got, nobody in the South, nobody in King's Landing seems to understand what warging is, except, the free folk accept it fully. So, when the small council is all looking at Bran all strange, like, hey, I'll go look for Drogon. Nobody seems to know what the hell he's talking about. That's never been explained. It's just on and on and on and on about how they didn't wrap anything up. They kind of forgot all these little plot points. They didn't tie things together in any semblance whatsoever. Loved the show, your show. Loved the series up until this season. But hey, it is what it is. You're not going to please all the fans, but man, I felt let down on this one. Look forward to The Watchmen and keep up the good work, guys. Thanks.
So I agree with you. I don't know if there's some secret society that intentionally fucks up socially significant, series, but why do we expect that they were going to nail the landing? It is much harder to bring a show in. If you say off the top of your head, how many shows have come in terribly? I bet you can name 4 or 5. If I said, name the shows that closed out perfectly, that the finale just nailed it, you're going to come up with maybe 1 or 2. It's more likely that a show is going to crash and burn, because taking an entire world and closing it down on itself in a way that is emotionally rewarding, that ties up all the mysteries, that's a hard thing to do. And most people who are skilled writers can't even do it.
Yeah, man, shots fucking fired. You made me want to go out and buy season 8 on DVD just to set it on fire in my backyard and yell at it. There's a lot of valid points here, and thank you for the kind words about our podcast. Somebody did a mix that they released on Twitter, which was like the John Hughes ending to Game of Thrones. And honestly, I really wish we would have had that, where you could have just kept going as you were going in previous seasons. I would argue that actually season 7 was a bit of a debacle too, but keep on going as you were in previous seasons, and then just ended at some point with a freeze frame on each person's face. And Jon ended up going north and fathering a family of wildlings. Ghost went to Hollywood and got plastic surgery on his ear, whatever the fuck. But just give us that ending. And this voicemail makes me think about the fact that most of my favorite shows got canceled before they could end. And that's why I probably still love them. Carnival never got to end. Deadwood never got to end. And I'm like, I don't know how they end, but I loved what I got. And I can just imagine that those characters went on living their lives. And I didn't need an ending. And I don't know that we did on this either. I don't know why we were so obsessed with finding out who sits on the throne at the end. Why couldn't it just be, we got a really good story and the war rages on?
All right. Thank you very much for the voicemail, Tom. Our next call comes in from Ryan in Georgia.
Hey, Chat Crew. This is Ryan, currently in Georgia, but originally from Houston, known on Twitter as GR Copel, and this voicemail is for Game of Thrones. It's not necessarily for the episode itself, as we're approximately 6 hours away from the finale. But I wanted to give a huge thanks to you guys and all you do for the show and for us, the loyal fans. Your devotion to the show, your tireless and thankless work, and your unabashed love for Game of Thrones comes through in every single episode you guys put out. Can't wait to hear your thoughts after tonight's episode, and I can't wait to hear what y'all have cooking in the future. Chat on TV and chat the movies. Have a good day, y'all.
Ryan, thanks so much for calling in. Now I know your first name, so that's really exciting. We interact a ton on Twitter, so thanks for always being there on Twitter and listening to everything that we do. I don't know if we can call it thankless anymore, honestly. Big D and I, every email now seems to start out with a word of thanks for what we do. That didn't happen in previous seasons, so that really means a lot to us, and it really reaffirms that we're doing something right. I'm always worried that we're going to let you guys down now, so it's like we get this weird anxiety before recording. We used to be careless and fancy free, and now it's like, oh shit, what if we lose this good faith from the audience? So Ryan, thanks for reinforcing that you like what we're doing, and as we move on to doing Shut the Movies in full force again and moving on to The Watchmen, I hope you join us there.
Not that we're going to change things to make you happy. We're going to step in shit, we're going to make mistakes, but we're always going to be true to ourselves. But it's nice that we're kind of in sync. We're not structuring content to make everybody love us, but it's nice not to get hate mail all the time. So we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Our next voicemail comes from Patrick in Portland.
Hi there. This is for Game of Thrones, the small council. My name's Patrick. I'm in Portland, Oregon, by way of Derby, England, and actually currently a resident of Vancouver, Canada, and that's a long story. Big fan of everything you guys do. Been with you guys since, first season of Westworld and before. So all the Shat franchises, Shat the movies. Love what you guys do. Love the addition of Carrie Gross and the King Bee, and even missed that other guy, what's his name? Richard or whatever. Only joking. I love you, Rog. So Game of Thrones is finished. Just wanted to call in about that. I thought it was interesting in the fact that, love it or loathe it, there were a lot of holes. And the more you look onto things like Twitter or Reddit, the more you think about, well, what about this? And how come that didn't happen? And whatever happened to this? Which sort of leads me on to my question. The double Ds were given the keys to the chest. They were given Aladdin's lamp. And I think they executed a visually stunning piece of television. And I think, hats off to them and the production team for that. But the story, as to the deep dive you guys went through was a little rushed. And having seen that they've just been given sort of carte blanche for the new Star Wars film, the Ben Kenobi film, is it? Or the Luke Skywalker film, I forget. I'm curious what you guys think of that and how that may turn out. Personally, I think these Star Wars mini films to sort of fill in the plot holes are in a little bit of turmoil at the moment after Solo didn't really hit the mark. And I think putting the double Ds on board is a huge, huge gamble. But, we'll see. All right, keep doing what you guys do. Love what it is. And I hope Shat the Movies comes back pretty soon. Thanks.
So I think he brings up a valid point. The Star Wars has hit a rough patch, so it's no longer a slam dunk. And I don't know. I think that the double Ds are going to be writing the new trilogy. So if they have their hand in content creation as opposed to adapting already existing scripts or plots, that could be dangerous because they had a little difficulty here in the last few seasons.
One of the most scathing previews I've seen of the Star Wars movie franchise came from Wired.com. And so basically the way that these movies are going to play out is Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker will come out, and then it's going to be a 3-year hiatus until 2022 when the Double D's first movie, which is still untitled, comes out for Star Wars. And then they have another one scheduled for 2024 and then 2026, which I just realized I'll be 46 years old. Jesus Christ. Anyway, but Wired.com wrote it and they said, yeah, there's going to be a 3-year gap while they get that movie done. And that's approximately how long it's going to take people to forgive them for Game of Thrones. So we'll all have forgotten about this before their first Star Wars movie comes out. But that is a huge gamble. I mean, these guys are going to be at the helm of Star Wars, presumably until 2026. So with as Patrick, as you pointed out, with the kind of sputtering of these last few Star Wars films, this could be, the nail in the coffin for that entire franchise.
Yeah, and we know that they got the job based on their performance in the first 6 seasons. I wonder whether Disney secretly has been like, did we just give the job to somebody who doesn't deserve it or isn't capable of it? There has to be some buyer's remorse.
Now, it's important to note that if they do completely fuck up the 2022 one, they don't necessarily get to do the 2024 or 2026. But it is likely that they'll be at the helm. This isn't an NFL franchise. This is cinema.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Patrick, for the call. Our next voicemail didn't leave a name, but it was about Jon and the Kingsmoot.
Hi, this message is for the final episode of Game of Thrones. I just need somebody to help me understand my biggest gripe about the episode, which is the fact that after all of this lead up to Jon Snow's parentage and the fact that he is the rightful heir, I mean, this is like the big secret of the entire series, that after he finally does Tyrion's bidding, basically, and kills her, and all the lords are sitting around and saying, well, I don't know who should be king. There is no king anymore. None of them feel it necessary to be like, hey, by the way, guys, Jon actually is the rightful heir to the throne. Like, Sansa was there, Sam was there, Arya, Tyrion. I mean, what are you doing? That just never comes up. That is so deeply frustrating. Now, granted, he probably would never take the throne. He would probably refuse it. But to leave that plot point just dangling is totally absurd to me. Maybe you had insights about that. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I agree. I think, the R plus L equals J has been one of the biggest mysteries. It goes back and predates the show. It is the biggest secret, the biggest reveal. And that it ended up doing nothing but temporarily dividing Jon and Daenerys, it's kind of lame.
I think you hit the nail on the head, though, in the sense that this is like when you go to karaoke with your friends and you're like, I really don't want to sing. I'm like, come on, sing. You were born to sing. You got a great voice. No, I really, really, really don't want to sing. I, Jon Snow, would rather not sing. I just want to go over there north of the wall, hang out with my wolf, my buddy. Nah, come on, you got to sing. He clearly has said, like, he's being earnest. He does not want to be the king. And so I think that's one factor. The other factor is you'd have a fucking bloodbath on your hands. If Jon is placed as king, the Dothraki and the Unsullied run fucking wild all over King's Landing, and you've got nobody who can fight them.
We could talk about this all day. The fact that they remained calm initially when they find Daenerys' blood all over the throne room, but you think now all of a sudden they're going to... what a mess.
Well, the Unsullied were like me in episode 5. They're like, all right, well, we're going to see how this plays out first before we kill everyone. And they're like, we probably should have killed everyone.
Exactly. Oh, so thank you very much for the call. Next time, leave your name so we could give you credit. Our next call comes from Eric in the great state of Kentucky.
Hey, guys, this is Eric calling from Kentucky, and I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for your great efforts during this season of Game of Thrones. It was particularly helpful to me because I work in a prison, and I work very, very early on Monday mornings, and none of the inmates have HBO. So I would get to work at about 3:30 in the morning on Monday, and by then the Instacast had already posted. I had someone I could discuss that with. But what I wanted to talk about was the idea of the conclusion of the series and the reaction that people had. And one thing that I've noticed lately, I've been on a lot of conference calls for work in the last couple of weeks. And one thing I've noticed is every time someone has to present information on a conference call, no matter how well planned, how eloquent, what information they're passing on, how, whatever, they could have the most excellent presentation in a conference call. Everyone ends the presentation on a conference call, at least in my organization, with basically any kind of variation of, well, that's about all I got today. I'm going to get back over to Bill. It's just there's never a good way to wrap it up. You know, if it's a song, comedy sketch, whatever. I think if you watch Mr. Show, that's one of the few sketch comedy shows that really kind of solve that problem by just having the end of one sketch be the first line of the next sketch, like a character just walks in and starts talking. Monty Python kind of did that too. But it's really hard to end something. And I think...
Okay, so unfortunately, Eric's voicemail cut off there, so we're going to address the first part. Eric, I want to say thank you. I'm glad that we offer you some companionship, and we appreciate all our correction officers. And I'm sad and shocked. I would have anticipated at least 10% of our audience was prisoners.
I thought Eric was going to say that he used our podcast to let the prisoners know what happened in Game of Thrones. Like maybe he played it for them, and they're like, oh, that's what's going on. That is not the case. He just listened to it himself and ignored them. So nice one on you, Eric.
Oh, that would suck if you were incarcerated maybe like a year ago. And then you have Eric keeping those secrets. Eric, come on. You can maybe make some friends. Get a confidential informant. You could break them with your knowledge.
Fuck, a spoiler could just start a riot.
Oh, yeah, just drop it. Be like, hey, guess what? Jon kills Daenerys. Rip, rip, rip. Lockdown as the prisoners just bloodshed all over the floor. All because of Eric and fucking Jon Snow.
But Eric, I mentioned it before on an earlier podcast that I think the reason why I have such bemused resignation when it comes to season 8 is because I kind of let go in season 7. And really, for me, the show kind of ended around Battle of the Bastards. And this is all just like bonus content that I just this is like preseason football. I'm just like, that's pretty, no, it is. This is the Pro Bowl. For me, this is the Pro Bowl where I'm like, well, at least I get to see my favorite stars out there on the field. I don't really care about how the game turns out. So it didn't feel ruined to me. This was just one interpretation of how the story would end. For me, it was more about the characters and their development. And so, I don't know. I feel like, because people have asked me, like, how are you so calm about all this? Why are you not furious? And I'm like, I just really enjoyed watching the show. But the richness of it really left for me around season 6. After that, I just kind of was like, all right, I accept it. And people who are raging about season 8, go back and watch season 7. The writing was on the wall, man. Like, you can't deny it. It was already there.
And I think one of the things that helps us stay, even is that we get hundreds and hundreds of emails each week that are on both sides of the fence. So when we're reading them, there's a good point here for why it's terrible. There's a good point here for why it's decent. So you're almost forced to be pulled in the middle just because of there is no clear answer. There are parts of the show that are great. There are parts that are bad. Was it the worst ever? No, nobody should think that. And I think it's easy for us to see the good and the bad in this season, whereas opposed to if you're off by yourself or if you don't have anybody else that you can bounce your ideas off, it's easy to stay polarized because you're going to find an echo chamber for what you believe. If you think the show is terrible, you're going to go to Reddit. You're going to find yourself some thread where there's 50 other people being like, this is the worst thing ever made. But we're lucky to be in the middle. So we appreciate it because it gives us some perspective.
The King Bee, when I was in high school, got me into comic books, and we would go to Greg's Comics in Mesa, Arizona, and he would give me graphic novels or introduce me to runs of comics. And one of the things I learned from runs of comics is that you have good runs and you have bad runs. Sometimes an artist and an author get together on, say, Batman, and they do a great run of Batman. And then the next person who picks it up does a terrible run of Batman. It doesn't mean that Batman sucks. It just means that that particular run of a thing sucks. And I think that people who are comic book fans really understand that. And so when you get these reboots of comic book movies like Batman, like Superman, you can appreciate certain eras and certain artistic collaborations because it is truly art. And I think with Game of Thrones, it's like that too. On certain episodes, you had a connection between the writers and the production staff and the cast, and you made magic. And other ones, didn't hit so well. I hate to use a example that's been beaten to death, but the Sand Snakes, that shit was terrible. It doesn't mean that Game of Thrones is terrible. It was just a part of the show that kind of sucked.
So our next voicemail comes from Dr. J in Austin, and he suspiciously sounds very much like our caller Matt last week, who said this was a doosball of an episode. But This time he's going by the name Dr. J.
Big D and Gene, what's up? This is Dr. J down here in Austin. Wanted to call about Game of Thrones. The finale is over. It's in the bag. We've seen it end. People are pissed, and I want to give an unpopular opinion here. I think that Weiss and Benioff are the smartest guys in the room. Look at our culture. Look at our society. Look how negative everything is. I mean, people are out there actively searching social media for things to bag on and crap on, and just, I mean, people love to hate stuff. And I think that they looked at this and were like, we've got 4 more seasons worth of shit. And HBO came to them and said, take your time and do it right. And they looked at each other and were like, hell no. I mean, what if they had done that? What if season 8 was the 4th from the end? And the reception would have probably been as bad as it is now, because they know they're in uncharted waters. They're not adapting. They're now writing this original material. It's not in their wheelhouse. It's not what they're good at. They don't want to land this ship. They certainly don't want to land it slowly. They don't want to fall down the stairs holding the walls as they go. They want to just get it out, get it done, take their licks, let everyone hate it, and just say, well, we got the main points out there and be done with it. Otherwise, they'd have taken this beating for the next 6 or 8 years until they got everything done and wrapped up. I mean, I think you rip the bandage off in one fell swoop, and you get it as good as you can get it. But if they had done any more of this show, it would have been awful. People would have been rioting and pillaging and pitchforks. It'd have been bad. So I think they actually made a good call. I don't like it. I don't like the way that the jetpacking and the zipping around and all. I don't like any of that. But I do think it was better than a slow death. So I do think they figured that out. My take on the final episode, the only thing I could have seen differently, I mean, I got it. But, God, if Jon had either gotten on Drogon and then turned into the king, or they had killed him immediately afterwards, that could have been a little bit better. Other than that, I think everything turned out in a pretty okay way. I was okay with most of what happened. I love the show. I love that you guys took the time to help us sort through it and talk about it every week. Thanks very much. I guess we'll hang around and see how the Watchmen go and see back on Chef the Movies. Thanks, bro.
So I think he brings up a good point. I don't know that anybody has brought up that maybe they were self-aware. The Double Ds realized they were not up to the task, and that by shortening it, they shortened the chance of damaging their reputation. That they realized writing and creating the story wasn't their strength. If they had the great source material, they could easily convert it. That they were great and skilled at that. But maybe they realized their shortcomings and said, let's get out of here quick. Because they got the Star Wars gig, and another 2 seasons of this, they might not have gotten even that.
It's important to note, when you think of great shows that have been on TV and specifically on HBO, it's important to note how many seasons they had versus Game of Thrones. So we think of something like Sopranos, right? And I was like, Sopranos was on forever. You know how many seasons Sopranos was on? 6. Breaking Bad, oh yeah, that was like forever, right? It was 5. The Wire, one of my favorite shows, 5. That seems to be the sweet spot for TV shows, about 5 or 6 seasons. 8 is a lot. You know what kind of shows go beyond 8? Things like Law and Order, SVU, right? Where it's just recycled storylines over and over and over again. You got characters who just have these incredibly long histories that you can't keep track of. It becomes a soap opera. And Game of Thrones didn't want to be a soap opera. So I do see that maintaining that level of quality, maintaining that cast, as you've mentioned before, Big D, people want to go on and do different things. Maintaining that crew and that production staff, it's very difficult to do. And on top of that, you have to keep one-upping yourself. Why do you think the battles this season were so much bigger than past seasons? It wasn't just because the story was drawing to a close. It's because you had to give the audience something bigger and better than last time. You couldn't do Hardhome over again. You couldn't do Blackwater over again. It had to be bigger. And I guarantee you, if we'd gone on to a season 9, there would have been a battle that was bigger than the Battle of the Long Night or bigger than the Battle of King's Landing. And so things just get a little wacky. Elephants, we definitely would have seen them.
Yeah, because the finale of Game of Thrones, The Iron Throne, was episode 73. Breaking Bad's finale was episode 62. So that's a full season less. that is a substantial difference in length in content creation. So it all goes back to what we said. It's hard to stick the landing. It's easier to crash and burn than it is to come in with something that's rewarding, universally loved.
Breaking Bad also had like 12 characters.
That was a good finale. And our next and final voicemail comes from our friend from north of the border, Bill in Toronto.
Hey guys, it's Bill in Toronto, Game of Thrones finale. What a finale, huh? I got one last, hey, what happened for you? Didn't you find it was unusual that Cersei and Jaime, after being laden with tons and tons of stones, well, in this image, one layer of bricks, but even that should have damaged their face and heads quite a bit. I've seen situations where a stone has fallen on an animal and they didn't fare too well. So, am I just being gross when I'm thinking I'd like to have seen a caved-in head or two? Yeah, I'm just being gross. Love the show, guys. Take care. Bye.
Bill, listen, I agree with you. Don't get me wrong. That kind of a cave-in, your body should be completely flattened. I'm just imagining Bill, though, standing out there in the woods and someone comes upon him and he's got this animal that's been crushed by a rock. And he goes, oh, look at this. A rock has fallen on this animal. This is bad.
Man, I don't know. Is shit different in Canada? But I have never come across a situation where a stone has fallen on an animal's skull and caused it to cave in. Never. Is there something in Canada that's going on that we don't get down here in the States?
Just smarter coyotes. That's all it is.
Oh, man.
But Bill, you're absolutely right. But I'm glad that their heads weren't caved in, because we would have gotten 100 emails about how that wasn't Cersei and Jaime. That why do you think their heads were smashed in? Maybe they survived and took some other bodies and smashed their heads in so they couldn't be identifiable. So I think the show was sparing us a lot of grief about a soap opera ending where they assumed new identities and went off to Naath.
Yeah, so Bill, make sure when you're doing your Billy Madison hit list, don't put us on it. We're your friend. Okay, we like you. Don't add us to your hit list.
And definitely don't smash my head with a rock. Give me something quick and painless.
Hopefully Gene never comes across a situation where a rock hits him in the head. Because if it does, we're going to know it's you, Bill. We're going to come find you. So that's it. That's all the voicemails for us. We got a couple that we're going to push off to next week so we balance it out with our small council too, because we had so much good stuff and we want to keep the conversation going. So thank you everybody who wrote in, called in, tweeted us. We appreciate it. People who donated. If you haven't donated yet and you want to, please hit us up. It helps keep the lights on for the next year until Watchmen. But we appreciate each and every one of you.
And again, as a reminder, we will have more episodes coming. So don't forget to write in hosts@shotontv.com with your thoughts on this small council, any ideas that popped up since the show has been over. I know the documentary is coming out. So if you see anything there that catches your eye, go ahead and write in about that as well. That concludes this week's episode of Shot on TV Game of Thrones. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram @ShotOnTV. On Facebook, just search for Shot on TV Podcast. The website is shotontv.com. Again, you can email us at host@shotontv.com. If you'd like to send us a voicemail, it's 914-719-SHAT. And again, make sure that you keep it short so you don't get cut off like certain prison guards. If you'd like to contribute to the podcast, as Big D mentioned, you can do that on our website, shotontv.com, by using PayPal, Venmo, or Amazon. Just go to shotontv.com/PayPal/Venmo or /Amazon. And if you'd like to complete a survey that helps us find sponsors that match your interests, just go to shotontv.com/survey. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. Everyone's been so kind with the reviews, and we love seeing them every week. That will really help us transition into the other shows that we're doing. Builds a little gravity around Shat On Entertainment. And so we'd love to get those reviews. Also, you can check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, where we review 80s and 90s movies. That's at shatthemovies.com. And if you're looking for TV shows to watch, might we recommend Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, and True Detective? We cover all of those at shotontv.com. So you can go to back episodes and check those out while you wait for the Watchmen to come out. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert, and the King Bee, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us on Tuesday for part 2 of the Game of Thrones Small Council.